Well, maybe we should go ahead and get started. If you got coffee, bring it on up. There'll be time to look at those books at the end of the presentation, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along in the presentation. So I've got this daunting assignment of talking about how to write a novel in 45 minutes. It's a process that takes probably at a minimum 1 year. And I'm going to talk about it in 45 minutes. But here we go. About 12 years ago, I felt called to write a novel. Now, I had spent quite a few years as a physicist and an Episcopal priest, and I had written scientific papers, and I even wrote a book that's back there on the relationship between science and religion. But I had never written a novel. I didn't know how to write a novel. I wasn't sure I could write a novel, but I felt called to write a novel. I felt called to tell stories about people, ordinary people with challenges in their lives who are touched by God. And I wanted to tell stories in such a way that there would be adventure and some romance, things that would draw the general reader in. I wanted to appeal to people who would maybe never go to church, people who might run the other way if they thought there was a Christian message. I wanted them to say, well, here's a good story. Maybe I'll take a look. For me, this has been a spiritual journey, and I want to share it with you this morning. I'm going to talk to you about writing for people like us, people who have big questions about life. First of all, I did write a novel. And I've written 6 novels, actually, it turns out. And that's quite still amazes me, and I'm working on a 7th novel. Those big questions that we have. Here gives an example of the big questions that we have. We find ourselves in a bewildering world. It's true, isn't it? We want to make sense of what we see around us and to ask, what is our place in the universe, and where did it and we come from? Why is it the way it is? To this, we might add some of our own questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Is there a purpose for me? Or as Billie Eilish sings, what was I made for? In a song that's likely to win an Oscar for Best Original Song, the Academy Awards next week. Everybody's got these questions. And this question doesn't come from a philosopher or a theologian or a psychologist. It comes from a physicist. This comes from Stephen Hawking. And I think these kinds of questions is what attracted me originally to the field of physics, trying to find truth. Trying to find truth. Well, as my life developed, I learned there's another place to find truth too. We know this place. Although this is kind of an unusual picture of Christ Church, because usually we see it from the other direction, don't we? We're looking up towards the altar where the service takes place. But I've chosen this on purpose to look to the rear because I want to point you to those 3 big windows. They're the 3 largest windows in the church, and they are all about truth. They're all about truth. Let's take a closer look. You see there are 14 panels. They're very colorful with an enormous amount of detail. And let me ask you, who knows, and I'm not going to ask Martha because she knows the answer to this, so she does, and you don't get to say. I'm going to ask you, what is portrayed in these windows? What is portrayed in these windows are the parables of Jesus. There are 14 parables represented here, and Martha and Jack Prince, in that wonderful book they put out on the 75th anniversary of Christ Church, even the book has a map in it that shows you which parables are in which panel. So this is a really valuable thing. They are about truth. Parables were a prominent way that Jesus taught the truth about God. And they're all fiction. They're all made-up stories. I love it as a priest to see the look at people's eyes when I tell them that the biggest windows at our church tell stories of Jesus that are made up. But they're true stories. Let's look at one. Zoom in on that if we can. Look at that. Aren't they beautiful? I mean, my jaw drops just looking at it. So Jesus told stories like this one about a man on the left who he left home in a huff, asked his father for his inheritance, went off to the big city, made a mess of things, squandered it all, and comes home crawling, hoping that he knows his father won't even talk to him anymore. He doesn't deserve any love or respect. He's just hoping maybe his father will hire him back as a slave. And you can see the artist showing the rags on this guy and his downcast look. He won't even look at his father. And the father, who the son thought wouldn't even give him the time of day, is bounding down these steps. You see his feet are off the surface of the steps, and his arms are open, ready to embrace the son. This is a story about God's unqualified love for us. Now, Jesus could have taught the disciples and others about this by having a 14-point bullet chart on a view graph. And he could go on in some sonorous professorial tone teaching them. The disciples probably would have fallen asleep during the presentation and almost assuredly wouldn't have remembered this thing 2 weeks later. But Jesus made up a story, a fictitious story, and we're still talking about the parable of the prodigal son 2,000 years later. The power of fiction. Now the question for me is, how do I go from wanting to share such profound truth about love and redemption to holding an 80,000-word manuscript in my hands? So that's what I'm going to try to tell you in the next half hour or so. Writing a novel, my experience, I see that it having 3 phases, and I'm going to talk about these 3 phases. But first, let's make sure we actually all understand or agree, we're on the same page, you might say, as to what a novel is. A novel is fictitious prose narrative of book length. In other words, it's fictitious, it may be based on facts, it may contain a lot of facts, hopefully it will if it's a good novel, but it's made up. It's prose, it's not poetry, and it's long, usually. It's a book length. There's a wide variety of different kinds of novels, and you'll hear these various varieties talked about, very plot-driven novels that are often called genre fiction, that may include mystery, romance, sci-fi, maybe inspirational, maybe historical fiction. On the other end of the spectrum may be novels that focus on the beautiful use of language, on the intricacies of character development. It's called literary fiction. The whole range in between where it tries to emphasize both. It's called that upscale fiction or book club fiction. Mine tend to kind of fall in that middle category. Typically, a commercial novel is 80 to 100,000 words long. There's some practical reasons for that, but if you go into Barnes & Noble, your typical novel will be 300 to 400 pages long. On the other hand, Old Man and the Sea had 20,000 words, and War and Peace had 600,000 words. So I think maybe we need to tell Hemingway and Tolstoy that they got it wrong, right? Here's an amazing, mind-boggling fact, real quickly. There are perhaps 5 million novels published in English. I don't know if that number is good. That comes from Stanford University, and there's a lot of uncertainty in it. I can't tell you for a fact that Amazon has for sale 32 million books. And there are 4,000 new books being published every day. So it's quite amazing. So that's what a novel is. Let's talk about these 3 phases, and I'm reluctant to even talk about 3 phases. It makes it sound like there are 3 steps, or maybe there's this checklist. If you do these 3 things, you can write a novel. Writing a novel is not about 3 distinct steps that you can follow, trust me, because it's oftentimes the progress is 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And a lot of times you're going through lengthy periods of time where there are no steps at all. But there are generally 3 stages in creating a manuscript. So let's take a look at what they are. This is my experience. There's getting started. A novel germinates The call to write a novel germinates with an idea, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Then you need a routine. If you're talking about something that's going to take you a year to achieve, you better have a routine for being able to stick with it, to get it done, to do it. I'll talk about that. The importance of notes. A novelist is always looking for notes and ideas everywhere, all the time. How do you collect those? How do you keep them? How do you organize them? And then tools that you'll need for learning how to write. Then there's a second phase of actually doing the writing. That's getting it from your brain onto the page. And that, for me, is typically a 6 or 7 month process, even after I already kind of know what I'm going to do. And I'm going to talk about topics like the author's voice, the workflow, how does the work progress as you move along? Or do you just make it up as you go along? Or do you follow some outline you've developed? What do you do? And then I'm going to talk about the really important topic of characters. That's a really essential part of a novel. And then finally, from first draft to manuscript, and this may be half the novel writing time, the editing and the rewriting. So let's look at getting started. Look at the idea of ideas. Once you're thinking about novels, you are always looking for ideas. Maybe an article in the newspaper, maybe a life experience of a friend or an acquaintance inspires you, maybe an experience that you've had, maybe a place that you've seen, maybe a childhood memory. I've used a lot of those different kinds of things as seeds for the novels that I've written. And so I'll give you an example of a novel and an idea. This is a picture of Mary and me camping in our camper van. Some of you know that that's a thing we like to do a lot. We have actually, in the last 6 years, have been camping for 1 year of the last 6 years. We've spent that many overnights out of the wilderness. Here we are. There's Mary standing next to our camper van. This is in Arches National Park here. We've been all over the country, from San Diego to Nova Scotia. And one of the things we do is we collect these magnets, little travel magnets from places we go and put them on the wall. And we love to do that. We look at them later. It reminds us of all the places we've gone. So one of the things we have done as we have gone around the country, we've met a lot of other people in these camper vans. And it's interesting. There is a large contingent of people who are full-time travelers in camper vans who are single women. Oftentimes of retirement age even, maybe 50 or 60 years old, traveling by themselves through country like this. And they have a lot of interesting stories to tell. You might think it's not safe, but they're out there, great adventurers. So that was a seed for an idea for me. And so I wrote a book called The Mountain Goat about a young man whose mom was one of those women who traveled solo around the country in her camper van. And he's a young man that we're going to meet in the introduction to this book in just a moment. But he's a young man who is fairly naive, inexperienced, risk averse, and he's grieving. So here's an excerpt from the audio book of The Mountain Goat. And I hope the audio is good enough to hear.
The road track was the only thing his mom had left him when she died last year, because it was all she had. The large Chevy camper van sat in the driveway of Ryan Browning's house in Lawndale, California, and Ryan had taken to hauling his laptop out there in the evening, swinging the tall captain's chair driver's seat around to face the rear, pulling out the little table that folded out from under the sink, grabbing a couple Blue Moons from the fridge, and settling in. After his dad had left 10 years ago, Ryan's mom had sold the house in Garden Grove, put everything into the road track, and hit the road. She'd lived in it full time and once told him that she had been to every state. He suspected she'd still be going strong if that Peterbilt hadn't backed over her while she was walking across a truck stop parking lot outside Carson City. The road track, Ryan recalls she said it was a 96, she'd gotten it used, had everything you needed to get by. A propane 2-burner stove, a small refrigerator, a couch in the rear that folded out into a bed, and even a tiny bathroom. The van was not only his wheels, His broken-down 91 Escort with 200,000 miles sat in the garage. It was also his office. It was a much more cheerful environment than his dreary dining room and provided just the right ambiance to work on his new blog. That is, it would be his new blog once he came up with a name for it and decided what it would be about. This much Ryan knew. He wanted it to be about something important, about the challenges of life, because you don't get to be 34 without learning something about disappointments and setbacks. At least he hadn't, and he suspected a lot of other folks hadn't either. Anyway, writing the blog entries, and he had at least a dozen of them stockpiled already, was cathartic. That and the blue moons helped a lot. And when those weren't enough, Ryan would lean back and study the dozens of travel magnets that his mom had plastered on every available metal surface in the van. Small magnets from everywhere, it seemed. Mostly little squares with the names of places she'd visited, like Bozeman and Acadia National Park. But some were other shapes, like one shaped like a wine bottle from Sonoma County, and another shaped like a saguaro from Tucson. He could picture his mom in each of those places, taking it all in. She'd never been much of an adventurous sort, but after Dad had run off to Florida with that woman from work, she'd seemed to come into her own. He originally thought it was a bad idea, in fact a dangerous one, for a woman to head out across the country alone. But after a year's worth of photos from her texts, usually a selfie of her smiling confidently in front of a glacier or a beach or a city skyline, he came to realize how this was what her life had needed. In almost every text, she invited him to join her. "Meet me in the Great Sand Dunes next month," or "I'm headed for the Smokies, come join me." Ryan always replied that he was too busy with work, and the last thing he needed was to drop everything and head off to parts unknown. The magnets gave him a sense of peace, and they transported him to those places where she had been. And he was there with her, a mother and son, all that was left of this family, living life and laughing and sipping Pinot Noir by the Russian River. But now, of course, there was only him.
Just a little preview of the rest of the story. Ryan Browning, grieving for his mom, is on the threshold of a great transformation in his life and great adventure. To get started writing, you need a routine. Anything that's a big project, something you're going to do regularly, you need a routine. If you're going to start an exercise program, as we know, all of us know, you need a routine. If you're going to start doing the daily office, you need a routine so you can stick with it. And there's several aspects. Here I am actually in my office, sitting there attempting to write. The first thing about the routine is it needs to be comfortable, because you're going to be spending a lot of time writing. And here I'm, one of the things I've done is spent quite a bit of money investing in a good, comfortable chair. I've got a good-sized monitor where I can see what I'm doing. I'm surrounded myself with things that give me peace. My Mike Trout jersey, religious icons on the shelf, a painting of our beloved northern New Mexico, painted for us by a friend of ours, and my coffee cup. So I'm all set to go. You also need a schedule. For me, I find that working every morning, mornings are best for me. It may vary for other people, but a set schedule, say from 8 to noon. I can't work for writing much more than 3 or 4 hours before I really start to lose it, start to fade. So 3 or 4 hours every day, maybe 5 days a week. And you need to stick to it. Now, I break that rule all the time, you know, and you got to forgive yourself and keep doing it over. You just got to trying to keep going. And you need solitude. It is said that anyone who has an internet connection is probably not going to write a novel. And I do have an internet connection. I sometimes when you hit a little snag in your writing, you fall prey to checking out Facebook or looking at emails or checking the scores on ESPN. Endless things you can do there that totally divert you from what you're trying to do. You need solitude. You need quiet. I don't even like any music. And Mary knows when I'm in the middle of writing a novel that I become kind of weird. And she's so good about honoring that and taking care of me, even filling up my coffee cup. Solitude. Jonathan Franzen says, good novels aren't written by committee. Good novels aren't collaborated on. Good novels are produced by people who voluntarily isolate themselves and go deep and report from the depths on what they find. I like that. Jonathan Franzen is that kind of person. He takes like 15 years to write a novel, by the way, so 1 year is really fast. So you think I'm going to get started, maybe I need to get a book and find out how I should start writing a novel. Well, actually, let me tell you a story, a fictitious story that I just made up. This is about Patrick Mahomes, you know, the quarterback for the World Championship Kansas City Chiefs, for any of you who don't know who he is. Patrick Mahomes, when he was 7 years old, his mom bought him a football. And the next morning, his dad grabbed the football, said, Patrick, let's go outside and toss the football around. They went outside. Dad handed Patrick the football and said, okay, son, I'm going to go out for a long one. And the son said, no, Dad, I can't pass this football. I haven't read Quarterbacking for Dummies yet. Of course, that didn't happen. Because Patrick went out and he threw that football, and he threw it over and over again. He got good. He got really good. Eventually, he was going to need professional training and coaching to become the player that he eventually came to be, right? But so this is not the way you necessarily need to get started. Here's author Neil Gaiman, who is a prominent British novelist, and here's his rules for writing, for getting started. His rules: write. Put one word after another, find the right word and put it down. So write your story as it needs to be written, he says. Write it honestly and tell it as best you can. I'm not sure that there are any other rules, not ones, that matter. As you go along, you're going to need to take notes all the time. You're going to be a professional note taker. You're going to feel like this journalist on the scene of the crime with your little notebook writing things down, because you need to know about the human condition. You need to know what this world around us is like. You're going to be noting the little expressions on the face of the checkout person in the grocery store. Did she smile at you in a friendly way, or did she avert her gaze when you looked at her? You're going to be snippets of conversations that you overheard, articles that you read, little inspirations that come into your head. You need to write those all down. Sometimes those things come in the middle of the night. They often come in the middle of the night when you wake up at 3 a.m. and one of those ideas will come to you, something you want to remember. And for a long time, for not that long, but actually for a while, I fooled myself in thinking I'd remember them in the morning. Don't do that. You never remember them in the morning. So somebody said that the lifespan of one of these ideas is about 3 minutes. So you got to write it down right now. So I don't carry a black book because you can lose a black book, but what I do always have with me is my phone. And so what I do is I write an email to myself. Write an email, and it may be a note that's just 3 words long, or it may be some kind of lengthy thing. Trying to put that into words, that note that I have, that thought, that expression, that thing I've learned, that thing I think might work in the novel. And I send it to myself, and that way my note is saved in the cloud. It's always going to be there. And then at some point I collect these notes. Periodically I'll collect them, put them into a big Word document. I haven't really counted how many emails I've written, but I did on one novel, and it was over 300 emails that I'd written to myself, these notes. And then what I do is I need to organize these somehow, and so I got these cool sticky boards, sheets of foam boards you can buy from Amazon, $10 a piece or something, tack them to the wall, and they kind of have a sticky surface like a Post-it note, so you can take your notes, cut them up into little pieces, and put them here and move them around and organize your story and augment your story. You see some of my notes here are just little tiny things, just a few words. Some of them are big, long-winded things. Many of them you're never going to use because it doesn't fit, it's not appropriate, but maybe you want to save them for some future use. You need to have notes, and you need to take care of them, because when you're sitting down to write, it's not all going to flow with you instantly. So you're working on the words for your novel 24/7. There are a couple books you ought to read right away, maybe even before you start writing, or even if you're not going to write. There are a couple books you ought to read. They're both very famous. One of them is Stephen King's book On Writing, and maybe you've heard of that book. Probably many of you have read that book. I think it's in two sections. Half of it is memoir, and then half of it is writing tips, tools, nuts and boltsy kinds of things. The nuts and boltsy kind of things is frankly not that interesting, what he did. A lot of other books have that, but the memoir is riveting, about his life and how he got started and his experience of writing. The other book I think you ought to look at right away is Bird by Bird. And this is a wonderful book by Anne Lamott, one of her earlier books, and it is about this writing life, and especially the experience of writing, the experience of when things aren't going well, what that feels like, and what you do to kind of get out of the doldrums. And if you're familiar with Anne Lamott's writing, it's written with incredible sense of humor. She's really funny. So I suggest you read that book. In fact, I suggest you read all of Anne Lamott's books. Start with Traveling Mercies, maybe, and read all of her books. Now, the learning how to write, there's a whole list here. I'm going to go through them real fast because I could spend 3 days on this. But you eventually, like Patrick Mahomes, you're going to need to have some professional coaching. And there's a lot of ways to do that. First of all, read novels. This is what Stephen King recommends. He says the greatest university for learning how to write is just down the street. It's called Barnes & Noble, because there is this collection of books there, novels, that you can study, and you need to do that. Be reading novels, reading all the time, all the time. If you're really serious, and if you have the time, go up to the university and get a graduate degree, like a Master's of Fine Arts degree. And there's a number of folks in our congregation who have done that, who are quite scholarly in the writing world. And I'm in awe of them. I'm really glad I could have them here to talk to. Get an MFA. Conferences, there are many writing conferences. Some of them are not that great. A lot of them are wonderful. There are opportunities to meet other aspiring authors. There are opportunities to hear about craft, writing craft from skilled teachers. There's opportunity to pitch your novel to a literary agent. All kinds of opportunities at these conferences. Classes, online classes, some of them are great. Books on writing, there's millions of them. I don't actually read these to learn how to write. I have a collection of them, a bookshelf full of these writing books on various aspects of writing, and I use them as reference books when I get stuck or when I'm in the editing process and I need to kind of understand why I'm stuck or what I've done wrong. Writing groups, every community's got writing groups, little collections of 4 to 6 people who get together and they share their writing progress with each other and critique each other. Feedback you get from various people. Prayer. Now, I didn't just add this last thing because a priest needs to always add prayer into the list of things you're supposed to be doing. It is essential. Remember I said this is a spiritual journey for me. I pray every day as I'm starting to write, and many times while I'm writing, especially when I'm sit there and I'm kind of stuck. A lot of prayer, just spontaneous prayer, sometimes silent prayer, or prayers from the prayer book. I'm going to share one from the prayer book at the end of my presentation that I think should be called a prayer for writers, but it's not. It's called a prayer for self-dedication, but it's a wonderful prayer that we could all be praying every day. So let's move on to the big part of actually writing the book, right? Getting the words down on the page. The author of the famous book, The Kite Runner, says this about the struggle in finding your voice, about communicating what it is you're trying to say. And this is so true. He says, you write because you have an idea in your mind that feels so genuine, so important, so true. And we know how that is. I have a fellow novelist here today, Lynn Shaner, by the way, who just published her first novel, and I know she probably understands that the frustration of trying to get something down that represents what is really in your heart and mind. And yet, he says, by the time this idea passes through the different filters of your mind and into your hand and onto the page or computer screen, it becomes distorted and it's been diminished. The writing you end up with is an approximation, if you're lucky, of whatever it was you really wanted to say. I mean, isn't that the problem of just being a human being? It just seems to me, we've got all this stuff inside of it, this life experience, these hopes, fears, longings, beliefs, things that are so deep, and we're stuck with having to express those in words to other people. And we're longing to be understood by others, longing to be understood by ourselves. But that's part of why we write novels, is we attempt to have that authentic communication about what it means to be human. Here's a question novelists sometimes get. Are you a plotter or a pantser? And what does that mean? Well, a plotter is somebody who outlines. A pantser is somebody who's flying by the seat of their pants. And so you write, and ideally you can think about it. Think about it if you're not actually doing any writing. It'd be nice to have an outline of the whole novel of what you're going to do from start to finish. I don't know of anyone who has ever been able to achieve that. The problem is that you're starting on a novel, you're getting to know the characters, and you get to know them as friends, as a human family as you go along. And as you get to know them, more and more you can see down the road. But you can't see it all in the beginning, so you may have a few chapters outlined, but beyond that it gets murkier and murkier. And so you're kind of having to re-outline all the time. Instead, you are kind of making it up as you go along, and that's good. That's good. That's because that's where the power of imagination and inspiration comes in. And I'll talk more about that. This is a photograph that sort of captures what it's like to write. You're driving down the highway at night through the fog. You can only see 100 feet or so ahead in the headlights. You're not sure what's out there. But you can travel across the country only seeing 100 or 200 feet ahead at a time, right? And that's kind of what it is like to write. I can see this clearly. I may understand what I'm going to do in the next 2 chapters with my characters, with the events, but beyond that, it gets fuzzier and fuzzier. And that's kind of what it's like. When you're in this space, one author says, don't think, don't overanalyze. Now, when you're driving, it's different. You do need to think, by the way, if you're actually driving a car. But when you're writing, don't always overanalyze. Don't think. Dream. Allow things to flow. Get those thoughts and that imagination flowing. Anne Lamott talks about, in her book Bird by Bird, she talks about a person who lives in her basement, who she's never seen, and the basement door is locked. She can't even go into the basement. But there's this person down there who's generating ideas. And her job is to sit at her computer and be busy trying to work. She says, as she says in her inimitable way, she says, you don't just sit there drooling, waiting. You sit there listening. And every once in a while, there'll be a whisper that comes up through the floorboards from that guy in the basement who's giving you the ideas, and you type as fast as you can. Because you're only the typist, she says, but the typist is a good listener. Also, a spiritual journey, as I've said a couple times already. There are other things that you can bring to bear. It was really awesome to hear Father Seth talk about Ignatian techniques of reading the Bible and reading Bible stories this morning, where you put yourself into the story, put yourself into maybe each of the characters and try to see what's going on from their point of view, using the power of your imagination. That is a very fruitful thing to do. So you have a point of view character, your main character, Ryan Browning, say, in his old camper van. But as he goes out and meets other people, you put yourself in their place. How do you see Ryan? How do you see the situation? So you do this imagineering all the time. You also can benefit from centering prayer, which is time where you're just being quiet, you're trying to rid yourself of all the thoughts and the noise, the considerations. What am I going to have for lunch? Did I pay the MasterCard bill? This chair is really uncomfortable. You know, you're trying to get all of those things to just flow out and let there be silence. And that's when you can start to hear those voices, those whispers coming up through the floorboards. So it's a spiritual thing. Let me just talk about characters. Characters are the main thing that's going on in a novel, and where you really got to invest your effort. Jane Friedman, who is a writing coach, a very famous writing coach, she says, investing readers in your characters is the single most important work of storytelling. And I believe that, and I work really hard at it, and I'm still trying to get it right. I think all authors are still trying to get it right. You know, you just keep working and working and working, and you never quite are there. John Grisham says that he feels like carrying a ballpoint pen around with him and going into Barnes & Nobles and finding copies of his book and going in and changing paragraphs that he thinks are no longer speak the way he wants them and put new words in there. So, I mean, you're kind of always working on it. So, caring for my characters, let me just try to walk through a few ideas really quickly. Here is a photograph that no one besides Mary or me has seen that I'm sharing. You're seeing it for the first time. This is a photograph of what I think Shelby Sims, who's the main character in my latest novel, Mail Girl, of what I think she looks like. One of the little things I do that helps me, I never share this with readers, is I will think about, if I have a character, if this were going to be made into a movie, who would play this character? Who would play this character? And then you can go online and find a jillion pictures of that character, of that person, and find one that just captures the right feeling, the right expressions, the right personality of the person you're trying to do. Hopefully you can do that. This actually is Marissa Tomei, the actress, and it's a candid kind of a family picture of her I found. But this describes Shelby Sims in some ways. She is a 37-year-old woman. Her fiance, who dumped her 3 years ago, once told her that her eyes were her most beautiful asset. But Shelby is afraid that her glasses, which she needs because she's quite myopic, that they kind of obscure that feature of her face. And Shelby, by the way, has a nervous habit of when she's a little flustered, she pushes her glasses back up on the bridge of her nose. So you can always kind of tell when she's a little uneasy. She is an outgoing, friendly, very compassionate person. In fact, her compassion is what rings through so powerfully in Mail Girl, and is really a triumphal thing ultimately. But if you look into this woman's eyes, you can see a little bit of vulnerability back there. Maybe, at least I can see, because I think she's Shelby, who I know very well, by the way. Mary has to accept the fact that during my writing times, these fictitious, totally made-up characters become my best friends for a while. You know, it's really weird. Writers are not always mentally really healthy people. Just saying. But she has some vulnerability, and she has a little bit of a look of hesitancy, like you might be getting ready to say something that's going to hurt her. So this is Shelby, and I'm trying to create a human being that you and I can relate to and get to know and care about. I have to be invested in my protagonists. I have to be. If I wind up really caring about Shelby Sims, which I did, the rest of the novel is pretty easy because I've got a friend that I'm traveling through this adventure with. If I don't, and I've had starts of novels, I've got 3 novels in progress that I abandoned because ultimately I just couldn't connect with the characters. If you can't connect with them, it's really hard. And if you can't connect with your characters, you can be assured that the reader's not going to connect with them either. A couple of more things. I write here, Meryl Streep's raised eyebrow. In a movie, you have the benefit of a wonderful actor like Meryl Streep, for example. And if Meryl Streep, imagine her in a scene where she just kind of raises her eyebrow in skepticism. One little 1 second long motion on the camera conveys layers of meaning and ideas and concerns. How do you capture that when you're writing? How do you capture it? That's a struggle. That's a challenge. That's a real challenge for the writer, and you need to, and I invest a lot of time trying to do that, and other novelists do too. My characters often stem from what I know. That is the people I've met, the people I know. The best person I really know a lot about is myself. There's often physics, and the Episcopal Church figures prominently. Shelby is not a physicist. She delivers the mail in rural Wisconsin. Physics will impact her life. She's going to have to read a Wikipedia article about advanced physics topics before she's done. And she doesn't go to church. She has no interest in it. But the Episcopal Church is going to have a profound effect on her life. And travels, things you see. Sometimes you have to do some research. You'll have to do a lot of research. I had to go, I don't know anything about delivering the mail in the rural parts of the country. So I had to go interview some rural mail carriers. And that sounds fairly daunting, but actually it's quite easy, because I can tell you, if you tell somebody you're writing a novel, they are really happy to talk to you. And they have a lot of time, and it's really wonderful. So you get to meet some new people, so it's pretty cool. The importance of dialogue is a way to convey, you can't capture Meryl Streep's raised eyebrows, but in dialogue is a way you capture that character. So that is a really challenging thing, to make dialogue flow naturally. Don't have time to go into that further. Myers-Briggs, this is a strange thing. I don't know if any other author does that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Myers-Briggs instrument. It's a personality test that you can take a survey where you can maybe answer like 100 questions. At a party, do you like to meet as many people as you can? Do you just like to hang out with a couple people, or you'd like to be alone off in the corner, or whatever? And you answer all these questions, and you get this fairly credible personality analysis of who you are. Not only that, but once you have that analysis of who you are, you have some projections of how you're going to interact and act in different situations. So I took the Myers-Briggs test for Shelby. Shelby unfortunately couldn't take it herself, but I took it for her after I'd gotten to know her and other characters in the book Mail Girl, and she's an ESFJ for you Myers-Briggs freaks, by the way. And so I can kind of check to see that this character I have is actually behaving consistently as a real person. So I do that. And then places can be characters. In my books, at least, I really value, because I've traveled so much in that camper van, I just value the sense of place. And so they can bring out attributes of your characters, the challenges, the opportunities, the beauty they see, all of those things. A scene I'm very proud of is in The Mountain Goat, where Ryan Browning actually meets a woman who is an art history major, and they're standing there looking at the Grand Canyon together. Ryan Browning, by the way, is a physicist, and she's an art history person, and they're different perspectives on what they're seeing. It's really quite interesting as they share those together and try to understand each other. And then there's this idea of character arc. How are you going to take your character on this journey from some kind of stable but maybe unpleasant place they begin with, through maybe a lot of challenges, a lot of growth opportunities, a lot of stuff going on that might be difficult, usually is very difficult, and bring them out, and in my books, out to some redemptive home place at the end. My books always have a happy ending, although there are some really horrible things to happen to the people in my books. Just warning you. Writing is hard and challenging and sometimes really frustrating and scary, and sometimes a writer might feel like this guy. You're stuck on the side of this mountain. You've invested a lot of effort and work to get this far, and yet you're not quite sure what to do next. I can't go back down. I'm not sure how to go up. What shall I do? And usually those are the thoughts that come to you when you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and you're lying there and you're thinking these horrible thoughts. Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, says, "Stop whining. Nobody made you do this." I love that. But sometimes that's not enough at 3 in the morning when you're asking these questions. Why did I ever even start? I'm no good at this. I can't do this. I'm going to quit tomorrow. I'm a failure. I'm washed up. And that's when you turn open the Psalms and read something like this in the middle of the night. "Let me hear of your loving kindness in the morning, for I put my trust in you. Show me the road that I must walk, for I lift up my soul to you." Okay, first draft of manuscript. Now we're getting into what's editing, and it is a long, hard process. I'll try to go through this fast. You're not done yet after the first draft. You may have a first draft at this point, and it's usually in such horrible shape that you're too embarrassed to show it to anybody that you actually, certainly anybody that you care about. So what you do is you have to read your book over and over, then maybe take a 2-week break because you almost get it memorized. Even an 80,000 word book, you almost get it memorized so that you can't assess it clearly. You stop for 2 weeks, go back and read it again. Joyce Carol Oates says, be your own editor critic, sympathetic but merciless. You read, rewrite, read, rewrite. And this sounds tedious, but it can be enjoyable because you're reliving the experience. I'm traveling through this story with Shelby Sims and her adventures again, and Ryan Browning, not looking toward the end, but enjoying the journey. You're not going to get through this if you can't do that. Read it out loud to yourself, to somebody else. Have somebody else read it out loud to you. You discover a lot of things when you do that. Then family readers. Finally, after you've done these other things, by the time I'm done with a manuscript, I have read my book at least a dozen times. Sounds hard to think you could read a novel 12 times, but you got to do that. Then family readers. And then there's always, for me, a scary time when I hand my draft over to Mary to read, because I have put everything about me into that manuscript. I have exposed myself completely. Every idea, every inspiration, the very best I can do is out there on the page. I am very vulnerable and very sensitive. And Mary does what she does, serving me the best she can. She rips it to shreds. She's pretty heartless. Actually, she's very heartful, and she knows she's doing what she can to really help me because she loves me. But it is hard for me, and I get defensive. I don't want to hear it. I push back, or I'm denying it. But eventually, I got to listen. I got to listen to what other people say, and I may have to go back and do a lot of revision and pay attention to it. Sometimes she's wrong. Sometimes I don't disagree with her, but a lot of the time she's right. I got to pay attention. And have other family. I have my kids read my books, and and then you have what's called beta readers. This is a community of other people who have volunteered to read a draft of your book early on. And they will read and give you feedback. Sometimes those people are totally useless. They'll say, nice job, Jim. That was a good book. I enjoyed it. Well, thanks, but that doesn't help me, Somebody who, and different people, you want a lot of people because people come at these things from different perspectives. So these steps may take 6 months or even years. Finally, when you've gotten to that point, when it is the best thing that you can do, then you got to hire a professional editor. And this is where you don't want to go cheap. You want to get somebody who is good and paid top buck and get them to do professional editors like Elizabeth Draper in our congregation. She does this kind of work. They will offer a range of packages from just doing line editing, you're looking for grammatical and sentence structure kind of errors, to doing the bigger overall picture of story, arc, and themes and character development. You want that, and you want them to do the best they can. And so you wait anxiously while that editor is taking it. It may take the editor a month to get through that, and they'll send this back, and there's another time of deflation of when the editor, you're kind of hoping the editor is going to send me back this little report and say, gosh, this is the best thing I ever read. Nobel Prize, Pulitzer Prize, Booker Award, it's coming for you. Now there's all this red ink, it's like, oh my gosh, But you got to listen, you got to pick yourself up off the ground and sulk for a couple days, but then you got to get going again. And you do all of those things. Maybe after a year, you will have a manuscript in your hand, and then you are ready. This is what you've got to have if you're going to submit it to, if you're going to interact with a literary agent, if you're going to publish it yourself. You've got to have that. And that's a happy time. Actually, I'm not just posing for the camera there. That's a genuine look of joy with that completed manuscript. So that's kind of my journey in getting to a completed manuscript. I said there would be a prayer at the end. And this is it. This is from the Book of Common Prayer, a prayer for writers. It's actually called the prayer for self-dedication, but I think it really works for writers or anything. It wouldn't hurt us to do this prayer every day. So let's say it together right now. Almighty and eternal God, so draw my heart to you, so guide my mind, so fill my imagination, so control my will, that I may be wholly yours, utterly dedicated to you, and then use me, I pray, as you will, and always to your glory and the welfare of your people, through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. One more thing. I've got all my books offered for sale back in the back of the room, and after we've had some questions, you might want to go take a look at them. They're $10 a piece. That's way below what you pay on Amazon for them. Every penny that you drop in the basket back there for these books goes to outreach at Christ Church. So three ways to pay. You put cash in that basket back there, and your senior warden, Steve Brimmer, is graciously volunteered to kind of man that area and make sure that the money is collected and winds up in the right place after we're done here today. So I don't have to touch any of it. Or make a check out to Christ Church and list outreach in the notes. Or if you didn't bring a checkbook and don't have any money today, don't worry. Take the book you want and drop the payment in the offering basin at church at some later date. Well, thank you very much, and take some questions. Thank you.
Okay, you described the process. And so my question is, at what point in your novel writing does Jim Trainor disappear and the character write the book going where he wants to go and essentially tells you what to do and where he goes and what he wants to do?
That's a really good question, Shell. Thank you. I hope you all heard that. He says, at what point in the book with a character does Jim Trainor disappear, the author, and the character take over and makes the decision about where to go? I'm hoping it's real early. I'm striving for that from the beginning. And if you've done a good job with your characters, that will happen. I can't predict when it's going to be, but it does have to happen. And then you are not so much inventing the book. You are saying, well, there's Helen, this character in my book. I wonder what she's going to do next. And you sit back and watch. And that's an exciting thing because these characters have taken on such life, as you're suggesting, Chell, that they'll come alive and they'll start writing the rest of the book for you. Wait.
My wife Barbara was a professional editor, and she when I say to her, "What's new?" she said she would say, "I'm working with a couple of writers, and by God, they can't write." It's really a problem, and she would get despondent, and then all of a sudden there would be a person who got the spark, and they would take off, and that was fun.
Wow, yeah.
That was fun.
These editors are really amazing people. I don't know how they can do such a conscientious, invested job with somebody else's piece of writing. They are amazing people. See Greg back there?
So just a quick comment and then a question about your presentation. There's a movie on Amazon Prime called The Man Who Invented Christmas. I highly recommend it. It's about the process that Charles Dickens went through in 6 weeks writing A Christmas Carol. And it's just so much fun because his whole study is filled with these characters from the novel. And it's just like you were
That's on Amazon?
It's on Amazon Prime, The Man Who Invented Christmas.
We got to watch that, don't we?
It's a recent movie about his process of writing. But I was curious to know that happy face that you had. What book was that?
That was Mail Girl.
Happy. It was what?
That was Mail Girl. My most recent
Mail Girl.
most recent novel is Mail Girl.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Mark, and then Father Oswald.
You said that you're on a spiritual journey when you're writing. When you said all your novels end with a happy ending, Could you expand on that? Because it sounds like it's more than that.
Here's what thank you. That question needed to be asked. What I mean by a happy ending is that the character has grown, knows much more about themselves, knows much more about their place, knows better how to answer those questions that I put up right at the very beginning. They may still have some obstacles in their life. There's still going to be some uncertainties, just like there is for all of us every day, forever. But they have come to that place where their knowledge of who they are and where their place in the world has deepened. And usually their faith in God is either become strong, or they've, maybe in some of my novels, there's the hint at the end that they're going to be drawn deeper into that relationship with God. And I have a number of different kind of scenarios in each novel where that happens.
Have you ever quit writing a novel, and at what stage? If you ever
Every
quit.
novel I've written, I've quit numerous times. Almost every day, actually. It's sometimes. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, you get frustrated with yourself, and I can't do this. But I've had 3 novels that I have written that are partially completed, and maybe I'll go back and work on them some more. But I just got to, and I probably have in book length probably have 50 pages or 60 pages written of so I've got a pretty well developed story. But I just wasn't feeling it, as they say, about I wasn't warm to the characters. I had an idea. The plots are never the problem. The plots I had, they were good stories, I thought, but the characters, I just didn't want to spend any more time with them. And I was pretty sure that the reader wouldn't either. So I abandoned them. So I've got 6 novels, but I've got 3 that kind of... Yes, Jack. Wait for the microphone.
People refer to their best places, kind of like heaven on earth. And as a kid, I grew up on the Chippewa Flowage. So that was kind of like my best place on earth. As you wrote your novels, number 1, which one was your favorite?
Oh boy, I've been asked that a lot, and I don't know. This sounds really schlocky and insincere, but it is absolutely true. I totally love every one of those 6 novels. And maybe my most recent one is The Mail Girl is my favorite because it's the most recent in my mind, and those characters in that book are most recent. But I really love all of them there, and I'm happy to stick around and talk about any of the books with you. But I do love them all. That sounds like a namby-pamby answer, I know, but that's the truth.
Oh, it's just that everybody has their happy place. Or
Yeah.
Like yours is probably New Mexico, or whoever they would be. So I wonder if that's inspiration for
Place is a real important factor for me. So I can just tell you, my first novel, Waverly's Universe back there, takes place in the really remote outback of northern New Mexico, a place I'm familiar with. My second novel, The Sand People, takes place in Maui, a place that Mary and I had only visited 2 or 3 times on trips, but saw a lot of interesting stuff going on there. I could say more about that, and that's the basis of that. My third novel, Up North, takes place up near the border between Wisconsin and the UP, up in the far remote north woods. My fourth novel, The Mountain Goat, actually starts off in Los Angeles and winds up on a road trip going all the way to Glacier National Park through Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and through Montana. And so there's a lot of places in there. So it's kind of a real road trip. My fifth novel, 68, this is very different from me, takes place in Los Angeles. And I know that area well because that's where I was raised. I lived in Los Angeles till I was about 18, and 21 actually, I guess. And I know it well, and this is about a guy going back to his 50th high school reunion. Hadn't been there in a long time, and most of the action takes place inside a grand ballroom in a Best Western hotel. We've been in those places, kind of glitzy, depressing places, and he's in there for most of the story. So I mean, it was a real challenge for me to write that. And then Mail Girl starts off in central Wisconsin, where Shelby Sims lives, and we travel with her through South Dakota down into Colorado. So different places, all places I've been, places I love. So the place is very important to me.
I just want to know how long you've been writing. When did you start writing?
2012 started writing fiction. 2012? Yeah. So I've been busy. Yeah, I've been busy. I love it.
Jim, can you talk more about the ways that you have this story in mind, but you also like the way that, is it the way that you get there? Is that like that I love that headlight or the headlight metaphor. So you can't see, like, do you have the whole story laid out, but it's sort of like the way that you're going to get there is what you only know chapter by chapter or a couple chapters
I think
at a
the way
time?
I'm going to get there, let's take Shelby Sims, because you got introduced to her. I mean, she's in kind of a real, she winds up just in the first 20 pages. She's got a past that's causing her a lot of grief, a lot of pain. She's dealing with a lot of memories that are hurtful, but she's also in a situation in the present that's really bad, that's really threatening to her. And she starts off on this journey, and I don't know where, I did not know at this point where it's going to go. I do have one requirement, because my novels are ultimately about faith. They do have an ending, a place of redemption, a place of growth for her. I know she's going to wind up in that place. But the ultimate place that she winds up to on her journey, I had no, this is interesting. She and her person she's traveling with at that point, she's traveling with another person, driving down the interstate. And they have to get off the interstate because there's a flood warning that's washed off part of the interstate. And they get off the interstate. And it's not until that moment that I know that Shelby's going to turn and go up in this back road up into the mountains. And that's going to be the place of her ultimate redemption. And I didn't know that was going to, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I didn't know that was going to happen until I was there on that off-ramp on I-25 south of Denver.
I'm guessing that when one's writing a novel and is deeply engrossed in it, in the whole creative process, that it must be awfully difficult, unless you can compartmentalize, not to have your thoughts constantly flying back to the novel. And in daily life, you might be, for example, in church or meeting people in the street. How do you manage? Do you compartmentalize?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think most novelists are mentally a little bit unhealthy. But I try to live a life. I have a family, I have a church, I have a real world to live in. I'm trying to enjoy that, and I am enjoying that. I think I can compartmentalize. When my 4 hours of the day are done, see, all my writing gets done in that one room. And so one thing that's good is I get up and leave that room. And then I'll go to the museum with Mary, or we'll go on a walk or do something, go to a church activity or something else. And I am able to sort of wean myself off the writing process. I never forget about it. Remember, I'm taking notes 24/7, and I'm thinking about it. But I can have a semblance of a normal life. Was that am I saying that accurately, Mary?
Yeah, I mean, he had to retire from being a parish priest before he could be a novelist. I mean, it just is so, good question, Helen. Because and when he is really in the deep throes, he's not, as he said, I had to change our lives, our schedule around the rhythm of his writing. You can't do it all. So, yeah. And looking at that place question, I'm thinking about, Jim, we both are mindful, so we appreciate and we fully immerse ourselves in places.
We do.
I mean, isn't that right, Jim?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
So, yeah, and like Los Angeles, he didn't really like Los Angeles anymore, but he knows it. And so, I mean, that's kind of an interesting difference. But, I mean, we really soak ourselves in the place when we camp. And sometimes we don't like it, we soak ourselves in it. And so he's got a lot to talk about in all these places we've been because we've deeply experienced them.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else about
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah. No, that's well done. Any other questions?
Other questions?
Oh, went back.
Jim?
First of all, thank you for this presentation. I have a screenwriting nephew in Los Angeles. And I was just wondering, have you ever been approached yet in your writing career to have a screenplay done for a potential film? My nephew might be interested in reading some of your novels.
Well, pass them along. No, I have not. You know, I have had reviewers say that my novels are kind of cinematic, probably because I've seen too many movies in my life. You
They
know,
sound
that
like it,
influences my writing, but yeah, for sure.
Jim, before you end, tell the part about Evangelina and how you got the idea for on the.
You mean the very beginning of the story?
Right. Because
This is how stories come. This is the story of Evangelina Gomez in northern New Mexico. This story starts off based on on a real factual event that happened, a tragic event that happened, and I read about it in the paper. Remember, I used to live in northern New Mexico, so I kept up on the news there. One winter, there was a van full of undocumented immigrants they were coming north from the border. They had crossed the border on foot and had boarded this van, unmarked van with an unknown driver, and headed north to some unknown destination. As they got through Albuquerque, to the east of Albuquerque, there's a little place where it goes up slightly into the edge of the Sandia Mountains, and it can also often be icy and slippery, especially at night. They hit that place, that van hit that place at night, and it rolled over and over, and there were 17 people in that van, crammed into a van, and they all died. Horrible that still makes me so sad to read about stories like that. Nobody ever knew who they were, so there was no way people back home could ever even know what happened to their loved ones. There were no names, there was nothing. So I came up with the idea of a story. What if when that van rolled and the doors popped open and people's bodies started flying, there was one person who survived, who rolled off injured underneath some bushes a little way from the rest of the action, so that when the first responders came, they didn't find that person. And what if that person was a 4-year-old girl? And that's the story of Evangelina Gomez and her important life that starts from there. Anyway, that was and so you get these ideas for stories from all kinds of crazy places. That's in Waverly's universe. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Some of your stories?
A little bit, you know. Let me get this thing turned off. I don't dream about. Interesting, you asked that. I can't ever remember dreaming about my characters, even though I.